On the day Clive got engaged to my sister, I sat in the front row of the audience. When he saw me, he inexplicably breathed a sigh of relief. "Carrie, have you finally caused enough trouble? Surrender to me." All the guests were terrified, not knowing who he was talking to, because I had died a long time ago. Today happens to be my 7th day of passing. Chapter 1, the day before I died, Clive broke up with me because he was going to get engaged to my sister. Summoning up my courage, I asked him, "Clive, can't you marry someone else?" Clive's dark eyebrows furrowed, and he looked displeased, gripping my waist tightly. "Carrie, if you need money, just say so. Your pretense is nauseating. Don't forget why you exist. So you're just obsessed with money, enjoying stealing from others? How despicable!" My expression turned melancholy. "I haven't forgotten. I exist because my sister Sylvia has a heart condition and can't engage in vigorous activities. But my parents didn't want to miss the opportunity to attach themselves to Clive, so they made me, the debt collector, replace my sister in serving Clive. Yes, that's right, serving, a completely unequal term. But in a situation where the wealth and power differentials are significant, and even my biological parents don't see me as a person, all talk of human rights and women's rights becomes meaningless. Your sister will be discharged soon and can get engaged and married. You imposter, get lost. Don't even think about taking over your sister's wealthy husband. What your sister's fate is, that's your fate too. Are you even worthy?" The voice of my birth mother's curses echoed in my ears. My heart ached, and I forced a smile, holding on to Clive's neck tightly. "Well, I do need some money. How about another 500,000? The dim light hit the tears in my eyes, and no one believed that I, this substitute, truly loved Clive. "Seeing you get engaged, I also want to turn my life around. Consider this money as my companionship over the years, my dowry from you." Chapter 2, on the day I died, Clive's temper was truly terrible. After hearing me say that I wanted to get married, he immediately had a cold expression, got up abruptly, leaving me feeling empty. Then, he gave me 2 options, take back what you just said, or get lost. He used to give me choices before, mostly apologize or leave. I usually chose the first one. After all, when he said leave, he meant standing outside the door, standing there for the night. But this time, I decisively chose the second option. I pretended to be relaxed, jumped off the bed to pack my things, and before I left, I reluctantly kissed Clive's lips and gave him a radiant smile. "Clive, thank you for taking care of me these past 3 years. Goodbye." Leaving behind the things Clive gave me, I didn't have many personal belongings of my own. After all, as someone without a home, I couldn't afford to have too many possessions. By the time I finished packing, it was almost dawn. I grabbed my suitcase and quietly left the room. Clive was already dressed in his loungewear, waiting for me in the living room. He threw the breakup check of 500,000 at me, and his face showed a level of maliciousness I had never seen before. His eyes trembled, his thin lips parted, and he actually spoke again. "Carrie, if you surrender to me now, you can still change your mind. You wanted money, right? Here you go." The effect of these words was like a collision between Mars and Earth, shocking me to the point where I almost dropped my suitcase. Clive, the wealthy young master, he was always the one who made others appease him, go down on their knees begging for his mercy. Where was the time when he would voluntarily offer a way out and let others leave? But as much as it was an honor, I never intended to take that way out. "Clive, brother-in-law, I wish you and my sister a happy marriage with heartfelt blessings." I turned around with a smile, and then tears streamed down my face. Gripping the handle tightly, my fingers turned white, and I cried while smiling. Well, I lost my lever, but I gained 500,000. It's enough for Grandma's surgery, and she can live a healthy life for a long time. Chapter 3, I am dead. The mango soup is a bit bland, no green onions, not tasty, Granny. I looked up and weakly tugged at the corners of my mouth towards Mango Granny. "Have you seen my grandma? She should be right in front of me, half an hour ahead. You can learn from her." 2 lines of tears mixed with blood streamed down my cheeks as I smiled with a sense of sorrow. My heart shattered. The soup she made is the most delicious soup in the world. She is also the only person in the world who truly cared for me. It's my fault I couldn't save her. But why, Granny? Why? I was so close, just 1 step away. Mango silently gazed at me with her dark eyes, then she gently touched my head, cold to the touch, yet I felt a warm infusion. Child, you did your best. A white light flashed before my eyes, and when I opened them again, I found myself back in the mortal realm. I became a bound spirit, confined within a 5-meter radius of Clive. Chapter 4, the first day after death, I floated in the air, utterly bored, watching Clive in his office. Clive still looked handsome, his suit jacket draped over the back of the chair, white shirt with rolled-up sleeves revealing his muscular arms. I was the one who picked out the cufflinks. But what good does it do? Even if I served him well, I was just a substitute for my sister after all. Just look at the difference in our fates. To Clive, my sister was his one and only childhood sweetheart, the delicate princess he had nurtured and protected. How could he bear to have her do these trivial household chores like a housekeeper or a mother? He had no problem ordering me around, a debt collector who was unloved by his own parents. However, it seemed like Clive was waiting for some news today, but he never received it, frequently picking up his phone, unlocking it, checking, and then angrily throwing it down. Especially towards the end of the workday, his face turned so dark it could almost use ink. How strange. But to be honest, without me reminding him every day to eat on time, pay attention to the weather, and share trivialities with him, he doesn't have much news. It turns out I used to be such a chatterbox, no wonder he found me annoying. Chapter 5, the second day after death, Clive's expression became even more grim. When he returned home, he threw away all the little trinkets that used to belong to me. Excessive. He gave my sister diamond jewelry, while everything he gave me was just a freebie. I didn't mind, I treasured them all. But he had the audacity to throw them all away. Housekeeper Wang hesitantly asked him, "Young master, why not bring Miss L back?" Standing beside them, I couldn't help but shake my head. I'm already dead, where would they find her? And it wouldn't be considered finding, but rather retrieving. Clive, with a cold face, turned and went upstairs. No need. But strangely, that night, he slept in my room, holding on to my pillow. Chapter 6, the third day after death, Saturday. Clive took the day off, didn't go to work, and burned all of my photos at home. All the Singh and Lin families were close friends. I haven't lived with my parents since I was 10 years old. Naturally, I couldn't compare to my sister, who had so much interaction with Clive. After being entangled with him for 3 years as a substitute, I didn't even have a proper photo with him. These photos were all taken by me, risking everything. But he just set them all on fire. Why not just retrieve me and burn me too? The riverbed is so cold. The fourth day after death, Sunday, Clive carried an axe and chopped down the trees I had carefully grown for 3 years. He personally approved each one that I had watered and fertilized, treating them like precious beloved roses. He really is despicable. He knows very well that all of this was my hard work. Because my sister liked flowers, but she also liked the most vibrant ones, freshly picked. So my mother forcibly changed my college major, forcing me to study horticulture. After following Clive, he even paid a high price to allocate a piece of land in the garden for me so that I could grow flowers for my sister. Every day, I would pick the freshest ones and bring them to my sister's sick room. Now that my sister is recovering, he's willing to uproot them all. Forget it, I won't dwell on it. After all, I'm already dead, and there's no one to take care of them. They will wither away eventually. Just like if it wasn't for Grandma taking me in, picking up scraps and raising me, I, the second miss of the wealthy family, would have starved to death on the streets long ago, with nobody to claim my body. And now, without Grandma, I have indeed died. They are no exception. Chapter 7, the fifth day after death, Clive still slept in my room, almost as if he had moved in. My parents and sister came, discussing the engagement process with Clive in a cheerful manner. Although most of the discussion was done by themselves, Clive listened attentively, his gaze calm. After a while, he suddenly spoke out of the blue, "Why isn't Carrie here?" My parents and sister were momentarily stunned. Then my mother forced a laugh and casually said, "That girl has always been wild, we can't control her. Who knows where she's off fooling around, never at home." I listened on the side, pursing my lips. It's not that they can't control her, it's that they simply don't care. When my mother gave birth to me and my sister, she had a difficult delivery and almost died on the operating table. As a result, my sister was born with a heart condition, while I was perfectly healthy. They say that twins often become enemies, one coming to repay a debt, the other coming to collect it. In this situation, it's quite obvious that I am the one who has come to collect. My biological grandparents were already displeased with my mother and, as an excuse, they saw every opportunity to criticize her for being useless and only bringing financial losses. My mother attributed all of this to me. She believed that I had taken away my sister's nutrition in the womb, causing her suffering from birth and causing her to be mistreated by our grandparents. So everything I have should be given up for the sake of my sister. So while my sister suffered in the hospital, I wasn't even worthy of returning home. They have no idea where I live, let alone where I am now. Clive simply responded with an "oh" and didn't say anything further. A hint of envy flashed in my sister's eyes, and then she leaned closer to Clive, resting on his shoulder. Clive, Carrie must be mad at me. It's all my fault for being weak and causing trouble for Carrie. If it weren't for me, she could have been happier. If Carrie also likes you so much, I'll give you up for her. My sister's words didn't sit well, and my mother became even more angry. She quickly grabbed her other hand and gently patted it. Sylvia, don't think nonsense. You're the luckiest one. That white-eyed wolf, Carrie, who wasn't even close to you in the womb, why would she have a say in your marriage? As she spoke, the pain in my mother's eyes was almost overwhelming as she hugged my sister tightly. She gently patted her back to comfort her. If she doesn't come, then she doesn't come. It's better without her causing trouble. My sister nestled in my mother's embrace, softly sobbing. But we're still sisters who came from the same womb. When we get married, I still hope to receive her blessings. As she spoke, her gaze carried a sense of inquiry, sneakily glancing at Clive. But Clive kept his gaze down, staring at his phone, lost in his own thoughts. I walked up to the two of them and mischievously whispered in Sylvia's ear, "Sylvia, you're lying. You clearly watched me die, yet you pretend not to know. You're really wicked." After saying that, I reached out my hand towards my mother and murmured with a tinge of sadness, "Mother's embrace, is it warm? What does it feel like to be held by my mother? It should be the same as when Grandma used to hold me, HM? It should be." Chapter 8, the 6th day after death. People kept coming to Clive to confirm the details of the engagement ceremony tomorrow, but Clive seemed distracted. Finally, he said to his assistant, "Zoe, find Carrie." At the same time, he sent me a message on WeChat, "Carrie, come back. How much money do you want? I'll give it to you." I couldn't help but laugh. Why does he think I'm so obsessed with money? I'm already dead, money is useless to me now. But I don't want Clive to find me. I don't want him to see my body, it's so tragic and so ugly. Naturally, Clive didn't wait for my response. He got angry and threw his phone aside, his face turning pale as he said, "If you have the guts, just don't come back." It's the first time I've seen him act so childish. I couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and frustration. "Clive, this time, I must say, you're quite something." Chapter 9, the 7th day after death, the engagement ceremony venue. Since it involves two prominent families, there are so many guests in attendance. Many of the guests are talking, saying that they are a perfect match, childhood sweethearts stepping into marriage. I sit in the front row, wanting to witness with my own eyes the man I love the most marrying my beautiful sister Sylvia. But my mother sits next to me, her face solemn as she sends a message to my father. "Where did you go? If Carrie doesn't want to come, fine, come back quickly." What could be more important than Sylvia's wedding? On my father's side, it shows typing for a while before he finally sends a message, "Carrie is dead. She jumped into the lake and committed suicide 7 days ago." My mother's expression freezes for a moment, she looks like she's in a daze. Another message comes from my father, "The body was recovered last night." It's all over the news, almost the whole city knows. It's a day of joy for Sylvia's engagement, no one knows about my memorial ceremony on the 7th day. Isn't it ironic? The whole city knows I'm dead, but my biological parents are busy preparing for my sister's wedding, completely unaware. No wonder the guests attending the wedding have such strange expressions. My father sends another message right after, "Today happens to be the 7th day, it's so ominous." Oh, so he's blaming me for dying at the wrong time, causing trouble for Sylvia's engagement. "Dad, it's not my fault, it's my sister who insisted on choosing that day and pushed me to my dad. She brought it upon herself." The music starts playing, and Clive walks hand in hand with my sister, slowly making their way to the stage for the vows. He looks really handsome today. Even though he's wearing the same suit as usual, he looks exceptionally handsome today. My sister looks beautiful too, with makeup on and the previous sickly paleness gone. She looks even more stunning. We truly are sisters. Our taste in wedding dresses is quite similar. It's the diamond-studded one-shoulder gown that I love the most, accentuating her slender neck and graceful shoulders. It's wonderful. If we sisters can only have one person's happiness, then from now on my sister will carry mine as well, twice the happiness. Thinking like this, I don't seem to hate her as much anymore. After all, I'm already dead. However, it's strange that with my beautiful sister standing in front of him, Clive's gaze keeps scanning the audience, as if looking for someone. Finally, to my surprise, he locks eyes with me. As if relieved, he looks down at me from above and says, "Carrie, have you had enough fun? Surrender to me." Chapter 10. My sister's face suddenly changed, almost blurting out, "Clive, what are you saying?" "Carrie, clearly." I raised an eyebrow, thinking to myself, oh, did she almost slip up? But my sister, true to her nature, quickly retracted her words, forcing a smile. "Carrie, she clearly said she couldn't come." My mother, sitting next to me, wasn't as composed. She looked at my position with a terrified expression on her pale face. "Ah, Clive, what nonsense are you talking about? Who is this? There's no one here." My mother was in a state of panic. Clive froze, pointing directly at me, his gaze sweeping across the many guests. "She's right here. Can't you see her?" Both my sister and mother's faces changed. The guests were in an uproar. Some of the more timid ones were already running out. After all, it's the 7th day, and superstition is hard to ignore. My sister approached, grabbing Clive's arm with one hand and covering her heart with the other, biting her lip. The vulnerability and charm that showed through her eyes made me want to embrace her. "Clive, stop messing around. Carrie said she couldn't come. It's chaotic now. I'm scared, my heart feels uneasy. We're still in the middle of the ceremony, let's not ruin it because of this small matter." But Clive ignored them, shaking off her hand, his face darkening. He took big strides and stood in front of me, furrowing his brow. "Carrie, what are you playing at again?" I was somewhat shocked. It's the first time I've seen my sister use her heart condition as an excuse, and it couldn't stop Clive. Before, whenever she said her heart was hurting, even at 3 a.m., Clive would leave me and go to the hospital to accompany her. There was even one time when I had acute appendicitis at 3 a.m. Clive was driving me to the hospital, but because of something my sister said, he just made me get off the car and take a taxi on my own, not caring about my life or death. Thinking about it, I tilted my head and looked at Clive, giving him a faint smile. As a ghost bound to this place, what can I really do? Clive saw me silent, his patience nearly exhausted. "Carrie, speak now." Even more guests fled in panic. Even my mother took several steps towards the exit. My sister, however, didn't move, her face pale, her fists clenched tightly, staring fixedly in my direction. But through the focus of her gaze, I can be sure she can't see me. Among the crowd running out, Zoe, the only one going against the flow, stood out. He made his way through the crowd, walked up to Clive with a serious expression, paused for a moment, and took a breath. "Clive, Carrie has been found. She jumped into the lake 7 days ago. Her body is now at the hospital." Clive was struck by lightning, his pitch black and profound eyes staring at me in disbelief. I tilted my head, gave him a sorrowful smile, and said, "I didn't deceive you. I really died." Chapter 11. Clive being able to see me not only exceeded my imagination, but clearly exceeded his as well. Even with news of my death, my body lying before him, he couldn't believe it. Trembling, he reached out his hand, wanting to touch my face. I didn't move, allowing him to reach out, and then his fingers passed right through my soul, grasping at emptiness. The impact of this piercing through my body was more powerful than any corpse. In that brief moment, the emotions in Clive's eyes began to shatter. They fractured into an incredulous tremor. He continued reaching out, wanting to touch me, hold me, make contact, but it was all in vain. To my sister, my mother, and all the onlookers, he seemed completely insane. Clive shook his head persistently, reaching out his hand. "Impossible, impossible. Clive, I am dead." I stood there quietly, with little fluctuation in my emotions, just feeling perplexed. Wasn't it said that he didn't love me? That he only saw me as a replacement for my sister's bed? Hasn't he bullied me all these years for the sake of my sister? Now, with this act, I almost believed that he truly loved me. Besides my grandmother, who else could possibly love Carrie? The day we broke up, I died. I died at the bottom of the river, not far from the hospital. The water at night was so cold, really cold. As I said this, I paused, tilted my head, and revealed a pleading smile. My grandmother's body is still at the hospital. I don't know how they handled it. At least, after taking care of you for 3 years, could you bury us together? I'm afraid my grandmother won't be able to find me in the afterlife. Clive's hand hanging by his side began to tremble violently. He stared at me, his eyes gradually turning red, and then suddenly let out a loud roar, fiercely kicking the seat beside him. The row of chairs didn't budge at all, but it produced a deafening sound that made everyone shudder. Stop pretending! Stop pretending, Carrie! Get the hell out! Stop playing! There has to be a limit to this madness. Carrie, come out! TSK, he still had such a terrible temper, always yelling at me for no reason. Can he only see me but not hear me speak? Does he think I'm some kind of hologram? Should I turn into a mushroom for him to see? Clive, please calm down. Zoe, the assistant always taking charge before Clive's rage escalated further, stepped forward and grabbed hold of his arm. Clive, listen to me. Carrie's body is indeed in the hospital morgue. Confirmed dead for 7 days. Upon hearing this, my mother and sister hurried forward, their mouths opening as if they wanted to say something, but Zoe stopped them with her gaze. Then, Zoe looked earnestly at Clive. Let's go and claim the body first, and then decide what to do next. As she spoke, Zoe's words were rapid, afraid that if she spoke too slowly, Clive would explode. After finishing her sentence, she immediately let go of Clive and took a few steps back. I watched all of this, feeling both amazed and impressed. Truly, Zoe, the special assistant, had a way with persuasion. Perhaps due to being a ghost, my reactions and senses had become dull, but now, facing Clive, I was calm. He's right, brother-in-law. Today is my 7th day after death. If you can see me, it's probably some kind of metaphysical occurrence. It's possible that tomorrow you won't be able to see me anymore. Why not do me a favor and collect my body? After all, you've been quite cruel to me these past 3 years. Of course, you can refuse. After all, I can't do anything to you. Clive stared deeply at me, his chest heaving, the veins on his neck bulging. Just when I thought he was going to hit someone, he uttered only one word, let's go. Chapter 12, To see your own body, it's truly a strange feeling. So strange that I feel like face-palming it. It's ugly. The body soaked in the river for 7 days, it's truly ugly, pale and swollen. Even the shoes my grandmother bought for me are torn. My mother, as if she finally remembered that I was her biological daughter, stared blankly at my body as soon as she entered. When she received the message that I had died on WeChat before, she was just shocked, but now that she sees it with her own eyes, there's a hint of unfamiliar sadness in her gaze. How did this happen? Suicide? In the morgue, there are 2 police officers, a man and a woman. The female officer is the one speaking, her face cold as she hands over a document, looking somewhat displeased. Her eyes sweep over my sister in a wedding dress, my mother in a festive cheongsam, and my father in a suit. With a mocking tone and a fake smile, she sarcastically remarks, your younger sister goes missing for 7 days, and you haven't delayed the wedding, huh? I must say, you could have waited until after the wedding, after returning home, after having children, and until the children could pay respects at the grave, before mourning. The effect would be the same. My mother chokes for a moment, her expression instantly awkward, on the verge of tears, somewhat comical. My sister pulls my mother back. Giving an apologetic smile to the female officer, speaking in a gentle tone, sorry, my mother is just overwhelmed with grief and hasn't fully processed it. The female officer's mocking gaze sizes up my sister's wedding dress and responds with a simple "oh." Silently, I give a thumbs up to the female officer. Clive, who enters last, glances at my body for a moment, and then his face turns cold. He turns around to stare at my soul, his voice indifferent yet stubborn. She's not Carrie. Carrie is right in front of me. But I don't respond, tilting my head and shifting my gaze downward, looking at his hands. If Clive hadn't trembled so much when he said those words, I might have believed him. No, he clearly recognized me, but he doesn't want to believe it. After speaking, Clive takes a step forward, as if wanting to grab my arm, but halfway through, he recoils in fear. Stiffly and firmly, he says, "Carrie, come home with me." The two police officers and my father all look at him as if he's crazy. My sister has already recovered from her initial shock and gently explains to the two officers he's experiencing hallucinations due to the immense shock. The male officer glances at the groom's suit on Clive, understandingly saying, "Ah, your brother-in-law and your sister-in-law seem to have a good relationship." But the female officer just coldly clicks her tongue. I raise an eyebrow at this beautiful-faced female officer. Oh, she's a sister with a story. She really understands the dynamics between sisters-in-law and brothers-in-law. If it weren't for my death, I would have chatted with her about how I became a substitute in bed, with no human rights at all. Clive ignores the other sounds, stubbornly repeating, "Carrie, come home with me." I smile. I have no home. Carrie never had a home. A home should be a place where you never have to worry about being driven away. How can a place where you're casually kicked out be called a home? Clive, have you forgotten? Every time you came back from the hospital after visiting my sister, seeing her suffering, you would get angry and kick me out of the house, making me sleep on the bench in the yard for 3 years. Whenever my sister was upset, I would be kicked out of the house, no matter the time, the weather, whether I was dressed warmly or lightly, and I had to be at her beck and call, no matter the task. If my sister wanted to eat crab in the middle of the night, I had to immediately prepare it, personally crack it open, and deliver it to her. If I were even a minute late, I would have to wait outside the hospital room for an hour, watching as she threw away the small amount of crab meat I had painstakingly peeled, because my sister, she couldn't tolerate any cold foods. How can that be called a home? Clive must have remembered, so he froze, his expression becoming complex and serious, but in the end, still with a cold voice, he stubbornly says, "She's not Carrie. We can't claim the body." Chapter 13, the policewoman took a deep breath, but couldn't hold back her expression. Lowering her voice, she angrily slammed the documents on the desk. The papers scattered, many of them falling to the floor. People are dead, can't we let her rest in peace? Carrie suffered so much in her life, can't she find peace in death? How much do you hate her? Hate, that word isn't really accurate. Clive doesn't hate me, he just dislikes me, looks down on me. Actually, Clive and I used to play together before we turned 10. He was really nice to me back then. He was a gentle and caring older brother, always playing with me after he finished playing with my sister. But that year happened to be the peak of my sister's illness. She would cry as soon as she saw me, crying that I had taken away her health, crying that I caused her such unbearable suffering, crying that I didn't deserve to be so happy, carefree, and able to play with her brother Clive. Crying until my mother's heart broke, her gaze becoming filled with disgust. That night, she smashed my dinner plate, saying I had no heart, no empathy, how could I eat when my sister was in such a condition? Just when my mother was almost about to hit me in anger, my father casually said, "Well, we have plenty of properties at home. If Sylvia doesn't want to see her, doesn't want her to have any contact with Clive, then let her move out. When Sylvia no longer suffers, when she's ready to accept her again, we can bring her back." That's how, at the age of 10, I moved out of the family, never saw Clive again. 3 years ago, we met again. I became a substitute for my sister's bed, and he became my benefactor. I still remember that dull, rainy day. I stood in the living room of Clive's house, filled with excitement, but froze upon hearing his first words to me, "Carrie, after all these years, you still love taking things that don't belong to you." In that instant, I felt like I saw my parents. I realized clearly that in Clive's eyes, I would forever be a sinner who must spend her whole life repaying the debt to my sister. Virginia, my father, suddenly frowned, bending down to pick up a piece of paper. It was my bank statement. Most of the transactions were money transfers to the same person. My father pondered for a while, as if remembering something. "That's the former maid who was caught stealing from our house. Why does Carrie send her money?" The policewoman let out a quick, light, cold laugh. Then she composed herself, staring at my father with utmost seriousness, and said, "Because she's the only person who has been kind to Carrie all these years. Because she survived by scavenging, doing odd jobs, and supporting Carrie for 8 years, so she wouldn't starve or freeze to death." After saying this, the whole room fell into a deathly silence. My sister, as if hearing this for the first time, covered her mouth in astonishment and whispered, "How could this happen?" Chapter 14. Yes, how could this happen? The second young miss from a wealthy family almost starved to death on the streets. The policewoman shrugged her shoulders again. With the strange tone, my sister couldn't bear it anymore and broke down in tears. Looking up, I glanced at Clive, whose face was gloomy and silent. Then I turned to my parents and gently covered my heart, tears streaming down my face. "Dad, Mom, is this the kind of life Carrie has been living all these years? Why didn't you tell me?" I almost burst out laughing. They never cared about me, so how could they possibly know? The housekeeper didn't follow their instructions and gave me a monthly allowance. Children who aren't loved by their parents won't be loved by others either. The money I received from the housekeeper covered my school fees, leaving me with only 60 yuan each month, just enough for 2 buns a day, paired with discounted tofu and pickled vegetables. If I had any extra expenses, like buying a pencil or an eraser, I would have to go hungry for a few days. On the day I almost passed out from hunger on the street, I luckily ran into the nanny who had taken care of me since I was a child. She was kind, but because she was too honest, she was marginalized and falsely accused, resulting in her dismissal. She found me, took me in, and raised me. She gave me the warmth of a home and a loving embrace where I could cry and be spoiled. But in the end, I couldn't protect her. 3 years ago, Virginia was diagnosed with gastric cancer and was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. It was Carrie who paid her exorbitant medical expenses. And coincidentally, on the morning when Carrie paid for the surgery, Mrs. Virginia's rescue was unsuccessful, and she died on the operating table. Half an hour after her death, Carrie also jumped into the lake to commit suicide. After saying this, the policewoman looked up at my sister, my father, and my mother. "Do you know even a little bit about this?" Facing the policewoman's question, my mother shook her head repeatedly, her tone stubborn and unapologetic. "Then if she had no money, why didn't she say anything? We've had family reunions over the years." As she spoke, she couldn't continue, a hint of regret flashing across her face. Because it was obvious that she remembered the countless times I had told them that the money from the housekeeper wasn't enough and asked them to investigate. But how did they respond to me? "Your sister is suffering in the hospital, and you still have the audacity to spend money? You're just lying to get money. How can you have the nerve to do this? How can you live such a good life?" And the last time they noticed I had no money, they voluntarily gave me money. It was because I agreed to be my sister's substitute, so that I wouldn't appear too shabby and upset Clive. The room fell into a deadly silence. Clive looked at my sister with a cold gaze, and the chill in his voice made me shiver. "So this is what you meant? Carrie agreed to be by my side to compete with you? You're jealous that I have this wealthy fiancé, and you're longing for my wealth and power?" "Clive, I didn't know. I really thought." Sylvia's face turned pale, she covered her chest, and in a weak voice, she gasped for breath several times. She looked at my mother, pleading for help. "Mom, my heart hurts so much." Chapter 15. My mother had a pale face, clearly still in shock from my death, but Sylvia's cry of pain immediately brought her back to reality. She anxiously held onto Sylvia like a mother hen protecting her chick. "It was me. I was afraid that Carrie would become greedy and intentionally told Sylvia," she said. I lowered my gaze, not surprised at all. Sylvia's mother was truly a good mother, but Carrie's mother was not. "Greed?" The policewoman suddenly spoke, slowly repeating those 2 words. Then she smiled contemptuously, her eyes welling up with tears. She sold her blood to raise money for Virginia's treatment, and she almost was deceived by an illegal clinic to sell her kidney. "Ma'am, I don't understand, both our daughters, what did Carrie do wrong? Didn't you give her life and bring her into this world? When Carrie was suffering, did you ever stand in her way even once, like you are doing today?" Tears fell as the policewoman turned her head towards my lifeless body. Her voice trembled violently. Besides her grandmother, she never felt a hint of warmth. She died in such a cold way. The water at night was so cold, when I pulled her out, that chill seeped into my bones, making me shiver. What did she do wrong? Yes, what did I do wrong? My sister's illness wasn't my doing. My grandparents' disgust towards my mother wasn't caused by my birth. If I had a choice, I would rather be the one with a heart condition. Where did I go wrong? What did I gain from all this? Why, no matter how hard I tried, did they not love me? My mother was bombarded with questions, her face turning pale. Accustomed to blaming me for everything, she couldn't find anyone to pass the blame on to this time. The well-maintained face lost its color. She took a few deep breaths, but still stumbled back. A few steps. She took Sylvia's health. She took mine. She stumbled and fell to the ground, her gaze aligning perfectly with my pale body. She took a sharp breath, shaking her head in fear. Here, she. Mom, I'm in so much pain, I can't breathe. Sylvia suddenly clutched her chest, bent over, seemingly in great agony, and started gasping for air. Clive, for the first time ever, didn't move, but my father, who had been silent from beginning to end, quickly rushed over and lifted her up, striding towards the door. Hurry, keep up! Don't let Sylvia stay with the dead any longer. Forget about what happened with Carrie before, she's our only daughter. We can't lose her too. My mother, upon hearing his shout, snapped back to her senses. After glancing at me, she gritted her teeth and immediately followed. The policewoman clenched her fists in anger. This family deserves to die. If I were Carrie, even as a ghost, I would drag them to hell. Sister, ghosts don't have that much power. I floated over and gently touched her shoulder to calm her down. Thank you, stranger. Carrie says thank you. Clive suddenly spoke, his eyes red, staring at the policewoman. She froze, then turned her face away and started crying again. You don't deserve to represent her. None of you are good people. Chapter 16, my body is still in the hospital morgue. No one claimed it. Ignoring the anger of the policewoman, Clive coldly left the hospital with Zoe. Back in the car, his face turned pale, veins bulging on the back of his hand gripping the steering wheel. Floating in the back seat, I spoke persistently, Clive, after the 7-day mourning period, I might really disappear. Please help me find a place to rest with Grandma. Shut up! Clive suddenly shouted, making Zoe and me tremble. Zoe cautiously asked, Clive. Clive coldly interrupted, Go. Zoe immediately understood, opened the car door, and prepared to get out, but before she did, Clive added, Find out where Virginia was buried. Yes. The car door closed. Clive started the car without even glancing back at me. The scenery outside the window gradually receded, the silence becoming suffocating. I thought for a moment, silently moved forward, and floated to the passenger seat. Clive, I shut up. Clive stared straight ahead, his profile showing a cold hardness. I will definitely keep you. Helplessly, I said, but I'm dead. Didn't you see my body? Clive suddenly raised his voice, his expression turning icy. You're right in front of me. Why should I accept that you're dead? That's not you. I can't possibly collect your body. I trembled in fear. You're so fierce. Why is your temper always so bad? He's yelling at me even though I'm dead. Clive clenched his teeth, his cheek twitched slightly, then he uttered 2 words, I'll change. I was stunned. Clive continued, I'll change anything you don't like, as long as you stay. His tone suddenly softened, with a gentle plea. Carrie, tell me, how can I bring you back? I furrowed my brow slightly, not understanding. Why save me? I committed suicide, after all. Suicide means not having any attachment to this world. Grandma is gone, what's the point of me being alive? I didn't speak again, and neither did Clive. He just drove home. Then he frantically mobilized all his connections, searching for a way to revive or retain my soul. I used to not believe in such things, but given my current situation, I can't help but believe. Floating in midair, I curiously waited to see if there was any unorthodox method in this world that could truly keep my soul. And Clive, true to his nature, with the manipulation of money and power, managed to find a seemingly promising solution. Late in the evening, they say in web dramas that rhinoceros horn can communicate with ghosts. Rhinoceros horn? A few thousand gold for rhinoceros horn? For Clive, it was no big deal. He really is wealthy. The news of Clive's high-priced purchase of rhinoceros horn quickly spread. He put down his phone and looked up at me. Though his excitement wasn't evident, his eyes were bright. Someone will soon deliver the rhinoceros horn. Carrie, I will keep you. I will definitely keep you. I floated down from the air, staring at the madness in his eyes. Clive, have you forgotten that you're my brother-in-law? You used to dote on and love my sister, constantly bullying me for her sake. When she cried, I had to cry twice as much. When she was in pain, I had to feel double the pain. So why are you going through all this trouble to keep me? Do you think I owe you my life? Do you want me to come back and continue repenting? She was the apple of your eye, and I'm just a weed, right? Chapter 17. Clive paused for a moment, his lips twitched, and he lowered his gaze, avoiding eye contact with me. After a while, he uttered a sentence, his voice soft, but I heard it clearly: I don't want to lose you. It wasn't the answer I expected, but fortunately, it wasn't these days. As I floated around him, looking back at his actions, it seemed like he had fallen in love with me. Clive, do you know why I like you? I suddenly spoke, changing the topic. Clive trembled all over, his expression frozen. The first candy I ever had was given by you, and I still remember the taste. I never knew something in this world could be so sweet. Well, I am really starved for love, and I really want someone to love me. As long as I receive a little bit of warmth, I will do everything in my power to get closer. So when I agreed to accompany you for my parents, it wasn't just for the money, it was also for my own romantic fantasies. These 3 years of dealing with him, while it saved Grandma, it also allowed me to indulge in my own love fantasies, accepting the fact that I fell in love with Clive. But no matter how much I love, there are boundaries. I never thought about ending up with Clive in the end. I just wanted the deal to be over, save Grandma, and then decisively distance myself. When Clive was in love with my sister, he was able to accept such an absurd act of using me as a substitute. He not only insulted me but also the word love. What I couldn't accept even more was that my whole family silently accepted this arrangement. They didn't even see anything wrong with it. So when we broke up that day, I said don't marry Sylvia instead of don't marry her, marry me, because that was my final advice to him, nothing more. My sister, she may have a weak heart, but she's cunning, not the ideal candidate for a good wife. But Clive responded with the words cheap whore to me. He responded to me with 3 years of disrespect and bullying. So Clive, please don't say you love me. It's too disgusting. Clive's expression suddenly stiffened, his thin lips trembled, about to speak, but then his phone rang. The ringtone was urgent, like a crack in the thick sadness that filled the room, and breathed a sigh of relief. Clive wiped his face, picked up the phone, and answered it. It was Zoe. Clive, someone delivered a 2B rhinoceros horn. I've already paid the money, and we found Virginia's burial site. Do you think we should? Clive's fingers tightened, his knuckles turning white from exertion. After a few intense breaths, he coldly refused, no need. I raised an eyebrow, but I wasn't surprised. Zoe didn't seem surprised either. He paused for a moment, then added, while searching for Mrs. Virginia's body, I saw someone familiar on the hospital surveillance. The last person Carrie and Mrs. Virginia saw before their deaths. It was her. Clive's brow furrowed deeply. Who? Your fiancée, Sylvia. Chapter 18. I don't know if the rhinoceros horn really worked, but after the 7th day, I didn't disappear. Clive didn't sleep that night. He stayed up with me until dawn. The moment the sun rose, his tense chest suddenly relaxed, and he looked up at me with a victorious smile. Carrie, I've kept you here. I sat by the window, silently watching the rising white smoke from the burning rhinoceros horn, without turning back, but in my heart, I wondered, did he really keep me? Can I really be kept? Even if he wants to keep me, is there anyone who can let him? Sure enough, in the afternoon, my parents came with my sister. My sister's complexion had improved, but she looked sad and fearful. My mother seemed like she hadn't slept well, looking worn out. She, who always had to put on makeup even to walk the dog, appeared disheveled for the first time. And my father, a man who couldn't even handle his own relationship with his in-laws, who let my mother be oppressed by them for so many years without helping, what can I expect from him? My grandparents favored boys over girls, and my father was no exception. To him, both his daughters were just average, but everyone said I was a debt collector, so they started to dislike me even more. The day Sylvia fell ill, it was the first time I saw my father so anxious. Because of my death, because if I died, he would only have one daughter left. He wouldn't have the confidence to let things slide anymore if something happened to Sylvia again. He would have no children. For a person approaching 50, the chances of having another child were slim. Clive, Carrie's body has been lying there for a long time. Shouldn't we claim it for cremation? The whole city is buzzing, waiting to see how we handle it. If we drag it out, it won't be good for either family, my father said, furrowing his brows and looking at Clive, who was clearly more indifferent towards him, with displeasure. After all, he was supposed to be his future father-in-law. It was one thing to not show respect normally, but why now? Carrie will live. No cremation allowed, Clive said coldly, looking up at the three people in front of him. The depth in his eyes stunned all three of them. Sylvia relaxed her expression, forcing a gentle smile as she walked up and tugged at Clive's sleeve. Clive, I was dangerously ill yesterday. You didn't come to see me. Was it because of Carrie's matter that you were angry? I am also deeply saddened by what happened to Carrie. I have no idea how my parents could. She knows, I spoke slowly. The day I died, she was on the riverbank, watching as I tied stones to my feet and jumped. Or more accurately, she forced me to jump. I stared firmly at Sylvia, unaware that my mother suddenly looked in my direction, her eyes gradually filled with fear. You didn't know? Clive also smiled, as if seeing Sylvia clearly for the first time, gazing at her face, which resembled mine by about 70 or 80%, and then he laughed with self-deprecation. Sylvia, you've been in hospital since you were young, so my parents and I always subconsciously thought of you as a simple, pure girl. But now it seems, when it comes to lying, you don't even blink. No wonder all these years, you played us in the palm of your hand, using your convenient heart condition. Chapter 19, Sylvia's face changed. Her smile was forced, and a hint of guilt flashed in her eyes. But when she looked up again, she put on that pitiful, sickly beauty appearance. Clive, what are you talking about? How could I know something that you all don't? Is that so? Clive sneered and violently threw a stack of documents on the coffee table. They were several color-printed surveillance images, clearly showing her sitting by my grandmother's bedside, crying. They also recorded my grandmother being taken out for rescue and her mocking expression. The stark contrast between her current delicate and gentle image of a sickly beauty and her past behavior stunned both my parents, especially my mother, looking at Sylvia in disbelief. Sylvia, do you know Virginia? Why did you go to find her? Sylvia opened her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I know. I know she raised Carrie. I went to find her because I was afraid that Carrie would cling to Clive and continue to snatch my marriage. I wanted her to persuade Carrie not to seduce her own sister's husband and be the third party. I never expected that she would suddenly fall ill. And I never expected that my grandmother would die on the operating table, rescue efforts in vain. My fist clenched tightly, filled with hatred. I could hardly contain the desire to tear Sylvia apart. My grandmother truly loved me. How could she bear such a blow? What she least wanted was to burden me. I remember it clearly. That day, the weather was gloomy, and the hospital corridor was filled with the smell of disinfectant. With every breath, the moisture in my heart was taken away, turning into knives, slashing through every capillary. Doctors and nurses cruelly told me Grandma was gone forever. I wanted to find Sylvia to exact revenge like a mad woman, but my sister looked at me arrogantly, disdainfully. She said to me, Carrie, what right do you have to make me pay with my life? You still owe me this life. As long as my heart condition exists, Mom will always pity me, resent you. So what if Clive is addicted to you? With me around, you will always be the third party. Actually, on that day 10 years ago, I deliberately cried like that because I saw you playing with Clive in the garden. He gave you candy and smiled at you. He has never smiled at me. He always just said, I hope you get better soon. Why? Why can you, Carrie, but not me? So she used her advantage and, with a few casual words, made our parents drag me out of the house, made me disappear from Clive's world. Carrie, as long as I'm here, there will be no one in this world who will truly love you. Yes, Grandma is gone. How can anyone truly love me anymore? Carrie, you're really pitiful to be so desperate for an old woman who has no blood relation to you. Instead of thinking about dying together with me, you'd better hurry up and die, so she doesn't have to walk the road to the underworld alone. Chapter 20, in the surveillance video, Sylvia's every word and sentence are clearly replayed. My mother covered her mouth, tears streaming down, unable to believe that these words came out of her beloved daughter's mouth. You drove Carrie to death, Sylvia. She's your sister. No matter how much you hate her, letting her go is one thing, but how could you? What kind of words are these? My mother thinks that no matter how much trouble there is, as long as she keeps me alive, it doesn't erase the bond of family. Does that make her a good mother? She would rather acknowledge that Virginia as a relative than consider you her mother anymore. Mom, please wake up. Seeing this, Sylvia stopped pretending, and her eyes were filled with clear hatred towards me. Looking at my mother, her face distorted by anger and resentment, was truly ugly. Mom, you're just like me, both pitiful souls burdened by Carrie. It's good that she's dead. The world would be peaceful without her. Carrie even thanked me for waking her up. To die. Sylvia's words were indeed correct. Her words truly woke me up from the depths of despair. I no longer cared about giving my grandmother a proper burial. When a person is dead, does it really matter where the body is? I just wanted to hurry and accompany my grandmother. She loved me the most. I couldn't let her walk the road to the afterlife alone. So I rushed out of the hospital and, without hesitation, jumped into the river. And Sylvia, always following behind me, watched as I sank, without any trace of emotion. Sylvia's words left my mother speechless. The blood drained from her face, as if she finally realized how excessive she had been towards me before. Sylvia, you've won. Maybe that's just how twins are. One is a debtor, the other is repaying the debt. Now it seems that from the moment you had a heart condition, I was destined to be the debtor. I wonder, did I really win? When we were in the womb, if I had known that my mother would be like this, I would have gladly given you my life, so that you could live for the both of us. Facing Sylvia, I sighed softly, after saying these words, suddenly feeling a bit weary. I didn't want to listen to this farce anymore. I just wanted to go upstairs and hide for a while. No, Carrie, don't go! A heart-wrenching scream echoed from behind me. I was startled and turned around to see my mother, who seemed to have gone mad, staring at me intently. Her eye sockets were red, filled with exhausted blood vessels. My heart skipped a beat. No way, she. In my confusion, my mother rushed towards me, tears flowing uncontrollably. But after years of indifference, she couldn't really say anything remorseful. Carrie, is it really you? Carrie, please, please don't go. Your sister didn't intentionally drive you to this. Forgive her, forgive. At this moment, she was still speaking up for Sylvia. I lowered my head numbly, staring at the leather shoes my grandmother bought for me on my feet, and smiled helplessly. Actually, I've always been hoping that one day you could hug me. But you see, we really don't have a mother-daughter bond, do we? Now I can't even be hugged. Carrie's mother is not a good mother, so she doesn't want a mother anymore. I hope that in the next life, we won't meet again. My mother trembled, reaching out her hand to embrace me, but how could she actually hold me? Clive suddenly stood up, grabbing my mother's arm tightly. You can see her too, right? My mother had a panicked expression, nodding desperately. Yes, I can see her. Clive, do you have a solution? Can you save her? Chapter 21. Sylvia was absolutely terrified by the two of them. She looked pale in my direction, her voice rising in disbelief. What are you doing? Carrie is already dead. She's dead. You both hated her, didn't you? She's dead, so why are you making these gestures? For whom to see? Clive had no initial reaction to her words, but upon hearing the last sentence, he suddenly looked up, his eyes sharp as he stared at her. This was the first time Clive had been so harsh towards my sister. My sister was startled. If you hadn't constantly instilled in me that Carrie was getting close to me, just habitually competing with you for this thought, how could I have treated her like that? No matter how much bullying and injustice she endured, she accepted all my demands, but I only felt that she wanted to take things from you, to have money. I'm angry. I've always been mad that she never cared about me. Clive's voice was not loud, but every word and sentence conveyed an indescribable sense of despair and pain. I couldn't help but be stunned. My sister was also stunned, but then she burst into wild laughter. Clive, do you think you're some kind of love expert? Do you think that as long as you blame me, you're not at fault? In the end, what's the difference between you and my mom? You're both unwilling to accept your own misery and you transfer your anger to Carrie, you despicable people. Is it difficult to find out what Carrie went through before, for why she was so short of money and why she agreed to be by your side as my substitute? But did any of you bother to investigate? She explained so many times, tried so many times to find an opportunity to talk to you. Did you believe her? You didn't, because all of you are the same, only willing to believe the Carrie in your hearts, a debt collector who knew how to steal from the womb, morally corrupt and beyond redemption. Sylvia had always been gentle and fragile. Never did I imagine that one day she would be gripping her neck veins and shouting like this. My mom trembled all over, looking up at her. Sylvia, how can you say such things? Carrie is your sister. Sister? You never treated her like a daughter, so why should I treat her like a sister? Sylvia had abandoned her disguise, sneering at my mom. Mom, have you forgotten how you used to call her a debt collector? How she didn't deserve anything? Now, because she's dead, you suddenly awaken your motherly love? My mom's chest heaved for a long time, but she couldn't say a word, because she was right. All the people in this room were the driving forces that led me to attempt suicide, but none of them were direct culprits. They only used their cold violence, relying on my expectations of them to disdain and hurt me recklessly. Sylvia was right. Ultimately, it was them. They never truly respected me. They thought I was a sinner who owed Sylvia, so they could treat me poorly with righteousness and digest the dark sides they didn't want to face. With a tilt of her head, Sylvia saw the large black rhino on the shrine next to her. As if she suddenly understood something. Indeed, living in the hospital all year round, Sylvia had read more than everyone present. Of course, she could guess what the rhino was for. She also understood why my mom and Clive could see me. She suddenly stood up and rushed over, hugging the rhino tightly in her arms, and turned back to laugh maniacally at my dad. Dad, we've ordered the rhino. Neither of us can see Carrie now. It seems that you, just like me, didn't care about her. Chapter 22. My dad's face turned red with anger and embarrassment as his true thoughts were exposed. He angrily muttered, What nonsense are you talking about? Where am I talking nonsense, Dad? You never loved us, did you? Sylvia sneered and shifted her gaze to my mom's face. Mom, the key to the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship was never about Carrie. Your parents never liked you, and it was because Dad never took any action. You refused to admit that you chose a useless man, so you blame Carrie. How are you better than me? My mom tightly covered her mouth, not even sparing her a glance. She just cried and looked at me. Carrie, I'm sorry. Mom was wrong. Can't you stay? Mom will treat you well from now on. Sylvia let go. Clive's usual calm expression shattered instantly. He panicked like a poor boy who had broken a precious antique, helpless yet anxious. Sylvia looked at him coldly, smiling. So you've fallen in love with her, right, Clive? Weren't you the one who loved me the most? We've been childhood sweethearts for so many years. You've spoiled and loved me all these years, and yet Carrie managed to steal you away, didn't she? I won't let you have a chance to see her, absolutely not. Sylvia picked up the lighter next to her, lit it, and moved closer to the rhino. Clive immediately panicked. No, Sylvia, don't. Sylvia had a twisted smile on her face, her eyes welling up with tears. She lit the rhino with the lighter, laughing and crying at the same time. Just one step away, and I would have married you, found happiness. Why? Why? Clive rushed over, pushing Sylvia away and snatching the burning rhino from her. Sylvia fell heavily to the ground, clutching her chest, curling up. It hurts so much. Clive, save me, save me. She seemed to be really ill, her lips turning blue, large beads of sweat forming on her forehead. But Clive didn't even turn his head. He frantically tried to put out the fire on the rhino. Luckily, the rhino didn't burn easily, only a small part was burned before the fire went out. My dad had already rushed over, once again picking up my sister and rushing towards the door. Clive coldly stared at his retreating figure, his voice low and chilling. Don't let her die. After she recovers, take her to the place where Carrie used to live. Let her experience the suffering that Carrie went through. Or else, your family will go bankrupt. You should know that I'm not joking. My dad's footsteps abruptly paused. After a few seconds of silence, he muttered "humph" in the midst of excruciating pain. Sylvia and his arms burst into a maniacal laughter. Lunatic! Everyone is lunatic! Father and daughter left, leaving behind only my mom sobbing in apologies in the spacious living room. I didn't even look at her anymore. I silently stared at the black object in Clive's hand. I really doubted, could they really see me because of that rhino? And as if to confirm my suspicions, my mom suddenly let out a scream. Clive, look! Chapter 23, sure enough, I guessed right. Things like the soul rhino were just illusions. My soul began to dissipate. The first thing to turn transparent was my feet. Clive turned around and upon seeing this scene, his eyes widened in disbelief as he took a few steps back. How could it disappear? I felt quite relieved actually. It's not so bad, is it? No, it's not. It's not good. Clive shook his head frantically, his expression contorted with pain. He cried silently, which shocked me immensely. He was actually crying. The person who remained cold and composed upon seeing my lifeless body was now crying. Carrie, don't abandon me, don't be so cruel to me, don't let me watch you disappear helplessly. I'll go crazy with that kind of despair. I looked at his increasingly intense madness in his eyes and shook my head, no longer saying anything. The speed at which my soul dissipated was not fast. 2 days passed, and I had only disappeared up to my calves. Clive opened his eyes, and upon seeing that my calves were gone, a desperate smile appeared on his face, as if he wanted to cry but couldn't. He quickly picked up his phone, but there was no response from me anymore. After struggling to catch his breath, he suddenly looked up at me. Carrie, what should I do? His voice trembled heavily. I watched him silently. I watched as he got out of bed and frantically rummaged through drawers and cabinets, searching for anything even remotely related to me. But in the end, all he found was a torn corner of a photo. It was very small, just half of my eye, but Clive treated it like a treasure, holding it in his hands and pressing it against his chest. Tears poured down like rain. Carrie, I'm so sorry. Sorry I was so angry before and threw away everything you left behind. I even burned your photos. What am I supposed to do if you disappear? How can I see you again? I tilted my head. Then forget about me, just like you've always done. After all, you will eventually forget about me. I heard Clive scream in helplessness as he held his head in his hands. My mom also started coming here frequently. She brought bags and bags of women's clothing, and every day she cooked like a madwoman, serving dish after dish on the dining table. With a cautious expression, she introduced them to me. Carrie, I don't know what you like to eat, so smell each dish and tell me which one you like. When you come back to life, Mom will cook it for you, okay? And Mom bought so many beautiful clothes for you, all matching mother-daughter outfits. When you wake up, we can wear them together and go shopping, okay? No, I don't want to. I want to be with my grandma. Chapter 24, Sylvia is really lucky. She didn't die. She was saved. My father really doesn't care about family ties at all. In order to stabilize the company, he directly sent her to the place where I used to live. He only gives her $60 a month for living expenses, but the one taking care of her is not a kind-hearted person like Grandma. She is a lazy, gluttonous woman with a temper even worse than a spoiled princess. Whenever Sylvia is dissatisfied, she scolds her in a very harsh manner, specifically targeting Sylvia with words she doesn't want to hear, calling her an unwanted bastard, calling her a heart-piercing lotus root, saying she deserves her current state. Someone who used to be pampered by parents and loved ones, now completely ignored. How can Sylvia bear it? Taking the opportunity, she came to Clive's doorstep, begging my mother with tearful pleas, asking her to come out and see her. Mom, aren't you the one who loves me the most? My heart feels so uncomfortable, please come and see me. Mom. Clive, can you look at me? Don't you care about me the most? Look at me. But my mother turned a deaf ear, only looking at me with a pleasing expression. Searching for nearby parks, she asked cautiously, Carrie, you must be bored at home. Do you want to go out with Mom for a walk? I lowered my head and looked at my disappeared arms, truly speechless. Is she not afraid to go to the park with just a head? Carrie, Mom, I've reached an agreement with your father for a divorce. My mother suddenly put down the magazine in her hand, her eyes reddened as she looked at me. Sylvia was right. I misjudged people and married a man who only cares about profit and lacks affection. It's Mom's fault. Mom is useless, but Carrie, please have pity on me, let me make it up to you, okay? I paused for a moment, thought for a while, and finally spoke, saying the first sentence I had said in so many days. Well, that's fine. Just live well. My mother trembled all over, and then she began to cry uncontrollably. Carrie, my Carrie, how can I save you? How can I save you? The door upstairs suddenly opened, and after enduring for so long, Clive, with a stubbly face, rushed down. He grabbed the fruit knife on the table and was about to cut his own wrist. I was startled. What are you doing? Clive's face had become thin like a drug addict, but his eyes were very bright. Someone just said that feeding the soul with blood can share life. I can save you. My mother, upon hearing this, hurriedly extended her wrist. I can do it too. But I calmly refused. But I don't want to. I only have a head left. It's so scary. I even wanted to disappear quickly. This world is not good for me at all. I don't want to live. Just let me have some peace and quiet. Don't bother me anymore. You guys can live well without me. I'll go to the underworld first. You live well, live longer, and bother me less. Clive's face was filled with panic, and he pleaded desperately. There were so many tears on his face that I felt like I had seen all the tears he would shed in his lifetime. Carrie, don't disappear. I'm begging you, don't disappear. You have suffered so much and we haven't treated you well. Please don't disappear. Please tell me, how can I save you? How can I save you? Extreme despair drove Clive into a state of mad sorrow. He seemed helpless, and he picked up a handful of candy from the fruit bowl on the table, holding it in front of me with both hands. Carrie, I will buy you candy to eat. Can you stay? I will make your future life very sweet, very sweet. Please don't disappear. Chapter 25. His hands were trembling so much, half of the colorful candy fell from his hands. My soul had already disappeared to my nose. Clive was desperate, slowly kneeling in front of me. Who should I beg to? Who can bring you back to me? My mother was crying so much that she had lost her voice, clutching her heart and falling to the side, crying out my name. Carrie, my Carrie, Carrie. Even my ears were gone. Their desperate cries gradually faded away. My consciousness completely returned to nothingness. Before dissipating, I thought how wonderful it is. I didn't hear that disgusting word. Chapter 26. I returned to the underworld once again. Mangpo was still sitting in front of her stall, boiling mango soup. When she saw me return, she didn't say a word and served me a bowl of soup. Try it, this time, is it delicious? I took it, took a deep breath, and took a sip. Just as I was about to swallow it forcefully with my eyes closed, the familiar taste spread on my tongue. I opened my eyes wide. Grandma's soup. I laughed and cried. Grandma, you learn pretty quickly. Should I go and be reincarnated now? Grandma must have gone far away. I have to run to catch up. A gust of wind suddenly blew, blowing off Mangpo's hood. A familiar and loving face appeared. Grandma! Grandma lovingly touched my head, her voice echoing throughout the underworld. The soupy hair loves to drink. Grandma will keep making it, always.